The afternoon of December 28, 1978, was cold and overcast over the Pacific Northwest. Holiday travel was still in full swing, and passengers were boarding United Airlines Flight 173 at Denver's Stapleton International Airport. The aircraft, a McDonnell Douglas DC-861, was scheduled to fly to Portland International Airport in Oregon. The flight was routine in nature and carried 181 passengers and 8 crew members, all preparing for what should have been a standard, uneventful journey. Among them were families returning home after visiting relatives for the holidays, business travelers, and individuals simply trying to reach their final destination before the new year. The aircraft itself was a long, narrow-bodied jet that had been in service with United for several years. It was powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney JT3D engines and was part of the extended fuselage version of the DC-8, designed to accommodate more passengers. The plane had flown countless successful flights and had a solid safety record, making it a workhorse for domestic long-haul routes across the United States. On this particular day, its task seemed no different from hundreds of others. At the helm of Flight 173 was Captain Malcolm Mac McBroom, a highly experienced pilot with nearly 28,000 flight hours, over 5,500 of which were in the DC-8. His First Officer Roderick Beebe was also experienced, with around 5,000 hours total time. The flight engineer was Forrest Mendenhall, who had thousands of hours under his belt as well. Together, the crew had extensive experience and training, and there was no indication of any problem with the flight when they departed Denver at 2:47 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. The aircraft climbed smoothly to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, and for the majority of the flight, everything was normal. The cabin crew attended to passengers, offering drinks and meals, and passengers relaxed into the flight, unaware of the events that would unfold during the final approach to Portland. As the aircraft approached Oregon, air traffic control began, guiding it down to lower altitudes in preparation for landing. The skies were darkening, and the Pacific Northwest was blanketed in typical winter cloud cover, but conditions were not unusual for the region. At 5:09 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, as the aircraft was on approach to Portland International Airport, the crew encountered a problem. When the first officer lowered the landing gear, there was an abnormal vibration and a loud thump. Simultaneously, the cockpit indicators suggested a malfunction. The right main landing gear light failed to illuminate, a signal that normally confirmed the gear had locked down in place. The crew immediately began troubleshooting. They cycled the gear again and consulted manuals to determine what might be causing the issue. As they tried to determine whether the landing gear was properly deployed, Captain McBroom decided to enter a holding pattern south of the airport to buy time. The plane began circling over suburban Portland. For the next hour, the crew focused almost entirely on diagnosing the landing gear problem. They discussed possibilities, tried to visually confirm the gear's position by asking flight attendants to look out the windows, and spoke with air traffic control about options. Throughout this process, a critical element was being neglected: fuel. While the aircraft had departed Denver with a full load of fuel, the holding pattern and extended time spent troubleshooting significantly drained the tanks. First Officer Beebe occasionally brought up concerns about fuel. He made several remarks, indicating that the fuel level was decreasing to dangerous levels. The flight engineer also raised the issue, pointing out the amount of fuel remaining in each tank. However, these warnings were not forcefully pressed, nor were they fully acknowledged by the captain. McBroom's focus remained almost entirely on the landing gear issue. To him, ensuring the gear was safely down seemed paramount. He appeared to believe they still had enough time and fuel to solve the problem and land safely. As the aircraft continued to circle, the fuel state became critical. The crew had requested and been given an extended pattern to allow for more time. They had also asked to descend to a lower altitude, which would help reduce fuel burn. But at this point, the time had essentially run out. Just after 6:13 p.m., as the aircraft prepared for final approach, all 4 engines began to flame out. The aircraft had run out of fuel entirely. The crew frantically attempted to restart the engines, but it was too late. Flight 173 began to descend rapidly, powerless, gliding over Portland's southeast suburbs. Captain McBroom aimed for a wooded area near suburban houses, trying to avoid a complete disaster. At 6:15 p.m., the aircraft crashed into a residential neighborhood near East Burnside Street. The fuselage broke apart and a fire erupted. In the aftermath, 8 passengers and 2 crew members lost their lives. Several others were seriously injured, but remarkably, many survived due to the captain's skillful glide and the structural integrity of the aircraft. Emergency responders rushed to the scene. Local firefighters and paramedics worked under chaotic conditions to extricate passengers, treat the wounded, and extinguish the flames. Residents of the neighborhood described hearing a massive crash and running outside to see the remains of the aircraft smoldering in the darkness. Debris was scattered across backyards, and several houses were damaged. But given the density of the area and the size of the aircraft, the death toll could have been far worse. The crash site was devastating, but not catastrophic on a wider scale, largely due to how and where the captain managed to bring the plane down. The investigation that followed was led by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB. Their report focused intensely on the crew's decision-making and the chain of communication in the cockpit. What emerged was a sobering realization. This was a preventable accident. The aircraft had been fully functional, aside from the possible issue with the landing gear indicator. Even if the gear had failed to lock, a belly landing would likely have resulted in few injuries, but the crash had not been caused by the gear itself. It had been caused by a loss of situational awareness and a failure to manage resources. Most critically, the dwindling fuel. The NTSB concluded that the probable cause of the accident was the failure of the captain to properly monitor the fuel state and respond in a timely manner. The report highlighted the breakdown in communication and crew coordination. Despite warnings from the flight engineer and the first officer, the captain had become so fixated on a single issue that he neglected the bigger picture. Compounding the issue was a lack of assertiveness among the other crew members and a culture in which the captain's authority was rarely questioned. This hierarchical structure was common at the time in many cockpits, where the captain's decisions were rarely challenged. The tragedy of Flight 173 prompted a major shift in aviation safety. One of the most important outcomes was the widespread adoption of crew resource management (CRM) training. This new approach emphasized communication, assertiveness, teamwork, and the importance of all crew members speaking up when they noticed a problem. CRM aimed to flatten the authority gradient in the cockpit and foster an environment where the best decision could be made collectively rather than relying solely on the captain's judgment. Airlines around the world began implementing CRM programs, and pilot training was overhauled to include scenarios involving resource management and problem-solving under stress. Thank you for watching this detailed account of PSA Flight 182. If you value stories that dig deep into the past to help us understand the present, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.